Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. Today, James and I talk about rewards. That is, means, mechanics, rationales, and uses for various kinds of rewards you can give to players and player characters in your tabletop role-playing games. Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game.
Okay, perfect. Well, I am ready now, so we should be good.
That's outstanding. Okay, good deal. Hello, and how are you today?
I am doing pretty well today. So, yeah, other than having a torn up room in my house, everything's great.
Well, that's a piece of home ownership, and there is something to be said for an older home, which yours most definitely qualifies. It was in 1902 or 03?
Oh, 01. Yes.
01. So 124-year-old house.
Yes.
I don't know. It doesn't feel it's like when you get a little scratch or something on a car that already has some scratches on it. You're like, whatever, no big deal.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, we talked last time about talking about rewards.
Yes, we did.
And I'm glad that you reminded me about that, because I've been like, my head's been like 10 places at once over the last week and some. But I'm actually really jazzed about talking about this, because this is a really wide open space, really wide open place to talk about it. So what if we start off talking about like what's the foundation? Like, what's the original?
I mean, for me, what I've been thinking about is the different kinds of rewards. Because I think people, when they think of rewards in RPGs, they think of two very specific things. They think of XP and they think of items.
Yes.
And I think that there is more than just those two ideas. And I think each of those can even be branched out further than most people think of. Because when they think of XP, they think of D&D XP and not the other forms of advancement that you can do in a game that might or might not be tied to XP. And with items, everyone thinks of the quintessential +1, +2, +3 magic item. And I think you can do more with items than just, hey, here is your magic item.
So I agree 100%. On both those. I think those are your two like typical broad categories. And I think it is useful to look at briefly, because I was there at the dawn of it. How's that? Like, what in the original RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, this whole idea of levels. All right. Do you know what that was tied to?
It was tied to the actual levels of the dungeon, wasn't it? The further down you went in the dungeon, the further levels you got.
Correct. So the further you went down, the further levels, and the assumption was that the deeper you go, the tougher it gets. Therefore, a level 5 character should be able to survive in level 5 of the dungeon. I mean, in a lot of ways, it makes sense coming from a very coming from like the wargaming background, and like you plan out scenarios, and you things are like rules wise, things are driven by the rules. You define what's on the table and how everything moves on the table by the rules. The story gets added to it, but it's not the same as it is now. So yeah, you have this idea of levels. And I remember when I got Star Frontiers, which was for me my first science fiction game. And I don't know when. I think I got that I got it when it came out. I don't remember if it came out in 82 or 83 or something. But anyway, Star Frontiers offered skills and skills-based advancement. You earned experience points through, accomplishing things, defeating foes and stuff like that. And then you could spend the experience points to increase skills and potentially some of your stats, if I remember correctly. But there were no levels. That was like, oh my gosh, that's so revolutionary to me. But it's fascinating that in like 50 years, it's not just the elephant in the room. It's like the battleship at the local marina. It's still levels. levels and
Yes.
experience points. Um, let's talk about that first, because and like maybe talk about what we see as the norms in that. That should be pretty easy, and then talk about maybe some ways that that could be expanded upon, or dare I say, improved.
Yeah. Well, for me, when I think of both, well, mainly with levels and XP, when we think about that, I think that the problem with the leveling is that games that have it are going to have it. It's impossible to, like, you can't play Dungeons and Dragons without leveling. It's a requirement for the game, but you can play it with or without XP. And I think that's something that has become pretty common practice for most people, that they either have the, like, we're going to use XP and use that for leveling, or we're going to do milestone leveling. And those are the two like standard ways to handle the level
Yeah.
reward as you go through something. And they're not the only ways I've seen it done, but they are the easiest ways, I think, between those two. And there's a reason that they default for those kind of games, that those are the two options you have. Um, for me, I've actually, the more that I've played, the more that I found XP to be the more difficult version of leveling progress
You
that you
mean
can do.
keeping track of?
Well, both keeping track of and balancing. Like, because, so for me, the problem is whenever you play a game is, I and most of the people that I play with do not like the idea of, I am going to go and just do monster of the week, fight the biggest thing I can find in order to get as much XP as we can to level up. We don't like that. We want a more story-based thing, but sometimes that means you're fighting things that, okay, we're slogging through these 10 XP creatures that we don't want to fight 1,000 of them in order to gain XP to level up anything. So is that worth doing? So a lot of us, the answer is, well, how are we going to handle XP? Is it a pure XP? Is it a like partial XP, partial milestone? So the more I've played, the more I've come to enjoy milestone leveling, just because it makes more sense with stories. But as I mentioned to you last time, I've also found that I am playing in a game that uses XP, and there's a way to do it that I found works really well for us. And it's the idea of, yes, you are granted XP, but only for things that are dangerous.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really helped keep XP as a viable for our play group
Yeah.
option, because that way it's not just every time you see, as an example, hey, we're walking through a forest and there's a deer. Well, I'm going to go kill
Yeah.
the deer because I want my 10 XP or 5 XP or whatever the
Yeah.
DM's going to award me for. It's like, no, that's not
That's
a
just not
threat.
worth
It's
it.
not worth it. It's not, why are we doing that? Or even the like, okay, there are 2 goblins left and they're running away, because my DMs will make the goblins run away. Okay. Are you going to chase the 2 goblins down? Is that really worth your time? Well, if I'm only so much XP away from a level up, I'll chase the goblins down. When you don't, when it's like, they're not a threat anymore, they're running away from you. What we do is, you wouldn't get XP if you did it anyways. Like, you can do it if you're worried about them going and like warning some like local encampment about your party being present and they're going to be a danger. But unless there's a story reason, no,
Well,
it's
I think
not
in a
worth it, because you
situation
don't
like
get
that,
benefit.
though, is that if you are, for me, I mean, it used to be a billion years ago, it was gold, you know, it was fascinating is for a long time, I thought like, that's so stupid. And I've read some arguments that, you know, maybe gold is not, maybe gold should be take like the amount of if gold is a measurement of the value of that which you have gained through defeating traps, figuring out how to get into a secret room, defeating the monsters that are there, overcoming variety of different obstacles to achieve some ends, that can provide a quantifiable measurement of success. Um, the I don't look at it when it comes to, and well, it's been a while, but not too long since I've awarded XP. All right. But even when it comes into ballparking or having an idea through milestones for level based games, um, for me, it's not kill or destroy, it's overcome. So in the case of those goblins running away, okay, well, yeah, you're going to get experience for them. If they were a threat to you, that has to be taken into account because you defeated them. You know, in that moment where you were at odds with them, By, if you killed them, you defeat them. If you chase them away and prevent them from doing what they need to do or wanted to do right then and there, you prevail. Now, one thing I want to point back to, you talked about milestone leveling, and frankly, I don't know anybody since 5th edition came out. I don't know anybody who doesn't use milestone. I don't know of any, I played it, I ran it for a long time, but like the folks that I've talked with who run games at stores or run game wherever, any kind of ongoing game, I literally don't know of anybody who is like, well, here's your 527 experience points, keep track. But something that you never experienced is before 3rd edition, every class had its own advancement table. And the experience points required to hit each level was different. And it was 3rd edition that equalized it, that said to move to 2nd level is 1,000 experience points for everybody. And that makes milestone level increase really easy, because supposedly on the back end, there's some degree of balance or parity between the classes. That was not the intention in 1st and 2nd edition. So you could do milestone back then and just say, hey, everyone is 3rd level now from 2nd level. But that actually imbalances the game over time, because a thief in 1st edition was expected to advance faster than a magic user because their abilities were different. And what's fascinating is, like, when I ran a campaign for several months, better part of a year, of Castles and Crusades, year before last, Castles and Crusades has gone back to class-specific XP tables. And the rationale there is, look, your rogue and your fighter are going to progress faster than your wizard. And that's intentional, because over time, there's just a different progression of power. And if everyone progressed at the same level rate, it would imbalance the party. It's like, and when you read it, that actually makes sense. My hardcore 5th edition players, when we played Castles and Crusades, that was a nightmare of a headache of trying to convince them. He's like, but I'm 2nd level and they're 3rd level. And it's like all this grinding of teeth. I'm like, look at what your character can do. But so even the idea of, the level-based growth and using either XP versus milestones, even that's changed the possibilities of it. And the last thing too is, it's been a while. I don't remember the last edition. It might have been 3rd actually, where wizards and some other spellcasters actually had to sacrifice experience points to make magic items.
Interesting.
So yeah, so even the iterations of the rules have treated this differently and would impact. Listen, if you just decide to forego experience points entirely and just go by milestones, you really can't do that in 2nd edition without screwing the game up left and right. You could do that, but in some versions, and I forget, like I said, I rarely played Spellcaster. So I don't remember which edition where that stopped off. But yeah, it's been different. Definitely been different over time.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of go back to gold you brought up, because in my experience, I again have had 2 different experiences. I've had an experience where we really didn't keep track of gold because there became a point where you're just so wealthy it doesn't matter. Like, if you're playing a campaign for long enough, right, is it really worth it? Like,
yeah, you probably pile it up. Normative D&D, you pile it up.
But I've also played in a campaign much more recently, and I think that this will probably resonate more with you, where when we've been playing, it's just that my GM has done a much better job of scaling what I'm buying to the campaign. By that, what I mean, when we started, it was a big deal for me to get enough gold to buy a healing potion, because I'm dealing with something where it's like, I'm going to need to heal in a minute. My ranger's cure wounds is not going to be enough to deal with that. But then now that I'm level 10, it's like, okay, you have exponentially more gold because of things you've done. Well, now we're like, well, you're going to buy a castle and you're going to pay for upgrades to that castle and you're going to do these kind of things. And it's like, okay, now I'm not spending money on weapons because I have magic items that never break and they're never going to go anywhere. So I'm not buying that. Or my character's enough hit points that I can soak up almost anything that I'm fighting against. But I'm spending my money on other things in the game that works. And I found like the more I've watched GMs that do that, where they scale what you're able to buy really well, like they both don't open everything at the start of the campaign, but they also balance the different things that you might be interested in. And to use Traveler, I'm trying to do this with my players, where they're all really interested in buying a ship, and then they hear
Yeah, good
yeah,
luck
they
with that.
hear the amounts of money, and they're like, "That's completely unattainable." And it's like, kind of, but there are ways that you can get around that. And I'm trying to show them, like, hey, if you make some connections that really have money, like a noble who might be willing to sponsor a nicer ship for you, you could do that. So I think that there is a way, and that's just to speak on the money side of things, because I know that there are some games where it's like Traveler D&D where they have very specific like
Yeah.
amounts of money that you work with. But then I've also played Conan where it's like your wealth score, where
Right.
money, like you don't have
Yep.
gold, you have, okay, you're this wealthy and you can buy anything basically under that amount of
Yeah.
wealth. So I think that one, it really depends on how you handle it as a GM and what your party is looking for. Because if you're playing a really low level game, if you're just like, hey, you're going to use this money to buy weapons, that's all you're going to need. But if you get into the point where you have players that are, I say low level or low like story, you're not getting into
Low
low power
power.
campaign. Um, then that works. And then as you get higher, you either need to figure out a way to let them spend that money on things that would make sense with more, or kind of let that fall to the wayside.
Yeah. So it, it it is interesting because different games, different systems mechanically, but also different games in terms of their setting deal with money differently. So we've got experience as a reward, and that could be through and experience for level based systems, and then you're dealing with it either by milestone, treating everybody the same, but then you need a game like most of them are where there's parity at level across by different like class, archetype, whatever you want to call them. And then there's the actual bean counting of here's how much experience you've been rewarded or awarded. Now, I mean, like with Castles and Crusades, I would award, say, okay, everyone gets this much. Maybe someone get a bonus or whatever, but my group didn't like that. My group didn't like the like, hey, you get an extra 100 experience points. It was kind of communistic actually, and I didn't like that, but that's beside the point. You don't all walk away with the same thing. But anyway, so you can do in level-based games, you can reward them by increasing their level. And the level obviously leads to more power and abilities mechanically and hopefully in some story aspect tied to the character. Experience points would lead to that as well, but by a different route. Um, Money, obviously, or rather, not even money, some kind of wealth, something that enables them to get stuff, not the stuff itself,
Right.
but something that enables them to get stuff. Um, is obviously a type of reward, and then experience points in skill based systems where the characters are being built up by bits and bobs. I actually find that easier than the level based system, because unless you just say, okay, everyone add a level, you know, or you fight with your players over the rationale behind Castles and Crusades, um, you can just say, okay, everyone gets this many experience, and hey, you get an extra one because you did this really cool thing at the table, and then they just deal with it on their own. Those kinds of rewards have deep roots in the hobby because people typically want their character to get better mechanically and story wise. Now, Traveler flies in the face of that and has always flown in the face of that. Star Trek Adventures largely flies in the face of that. you really don't improve your character over time. You can change your character. Traveler relies on stuff. What other means of reward? You mentioned the other broad category in the traditional approach, which is equipment, magic stuff.
Items.
Let items. Let's chew on that for a little bit and see what it turns into. Items, specific items as rewards for either story goal accomplishment or role play or whatever.
Yeah, and that's one of the things for me as a GM, I'm actually having the hardest time with is with items as rewards. Because as I have played games and done things, generally in my experience, when you are giving a player a specific item, it is either because it's in a story that's been pre-written, and therefore you're like, hey, someone will get this +2 bow because that's what's there. Um, or in some cases where I've been in smaller parties, so 1, 2, maybe 3 players at the most, where GMs will give players specific items to prep them for something coming up. So, an example, I was in a Curse of Strahd campaign. The GM wanted to make sure that our 3
Right.
players could handle Strahd at what was not.
You needed the
Yeah,
sun
so he
sword.
made sure each of us had something to make it
Remember.
a reasonable fight. But it
Yeah.
worked into the story because it allowed him to run specific sessions that ended up with us finding those
Yeah.
items. So it worked really well with the story and helping our characters. But most of the time when you're working with items, I see that it falls into like 3 different categories. There's general use, things like healing potions or a vac suit and traveler or
Bag of freaking holding.
exactly.
Everyone has a bag of holding. But anyway, yeah, I get your point. Yeah, just general use stuff that will be broadly, more than likely, persistently useful for the character and even the whole group.
Correct. And then I see things that are given to fill in shortcomings for a player, like something that they can't do and they need this in order for the campaign to work.
Okay.
And then number 3 are what I would call game end rewards, things that are kind of the really big thing that you get at the end of an adventure, or like, okay, we're ending this like campaign story, like book, and we're moving on, but we want to use these characters,
Yeah.
but I want to give you something big because we just played through this really big thing that either I planned and we're going to keep using these characters or this book. It's like, well, yeah, another a +3 sword isn't going to really outdo that +2 sword. So, like in Traveler, as an example, like, oh, a really big thing would be, oh, you find this really nice ship that like came at the end of this, and instead of it getting blown up, you found a way to salvage it. Now you can try to fix it and use it in the next part of the campaign.
Yeah.
But I would consider that like an end game thing. You don't want to give that to a beginner to fulfill something. You want that to be like, maybe this isn't the end of the campaign, but it's something that we can use if we choose to keep going. And those are kind of the 3 specific categories for items that I see being given to players.
I think that's a good breakdown actually, because your general use stuff is it's just going to be generally useful. You know, like say take Traveler, vac suit, med kit, different kinds of weapons, ammunition, stuff like that. I mean, it's just and it not so much like, hey, here's this special thing that you're going to use really in this like in this one way in the story, and I need it there because I'm obeying the module or I had some vision for the way things are supposed to unfold. The players are going to use those things in expected and maybe unexpected and creative ways, but they need them. Um, the okay, I know that they need the sun sword or whatever it was called in Curse of Strahd. I know they need that damn thing, so I got to figure out a way to get that to them and not make it so like ham-handed and obvious, like you just find it there on the side of the road. Um, I like the idea of differentiating the end of story, the end of campaign, the end of chapter, the end of the movie sort of thing. I like that as a GM, like to set that aside and say, okay, what kind of cool thing might you like in Traveler? You make away with a ship, or you do something like you save the life of a noble or something like that, and it is clear at the end that this is going to pay off for you in the future as a contact or a patron or something like that. So the payoff is sitting there. Even getting a starship, the payoff for that would be all the things you could do with it in the future, but the lovely anticipation of knowing that you have it. I like that breakdown. I know where I've struggled sometimes when it comes to items is thinking, okay, like you found the bandits' lair, and the bandits were pretty tough, and they were hiding behind a waterfall in a cave, and they had a bunch of stuff that they've been stealing from people on this trade road for months. So they have this heterogeneous, like weirdo pile of stuff. You know, I remember once doing something like that, and then one of my players was like, he was really peeved because his character used a great sword, and the only bladed weapon he found was a scimitar. He's like, I don't use a scimitar. I'm like, yeah, well, but you don't special order the crap that the bandits stole. So
Right.
that you got to walk a fine line with that. Like, are you pandering to your players by giving them the stuff their characters would want, or do you try to inject some sense of a like, no, man, it's just there's like a weird green jade statue. You have no idea what it is. Is it worth something? Probably. You have no use for it, but you could turn around and sell it. But I like the three categories.
Well, and that's what one of the things that I had fun with in a campaign, because I was the player with this, and my GM he's like, "Hey, you beat the bandits. Here's the stuff. There's this really nice card table," and everyone's like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, what am I gonna do with this? Like, this is completely pointless, but it's a reward, so I write it down because it was in the bandit's random lair. And I've now reached the point where it's like, I have the castle, I have a bunch of money, my character's being expected to throw parties because I decided to get a noble title and be that.
Where in the hell did you keep this card table all
So
this
that's
time?
what was really fun is I brought it back. There's other stuff in the story to where I had somewhere to store it. I had a warehouse that I could store it.
Okay.
So now that I have this castle, I brought this card table there, and my character's getting ready to throw a party, and I bring out this card table, and he's sitting at it, and he's playing at this card table, and then realizes that one of the seats is actually enchanted to where it lets you see the other player's cards. So this bandit leader was cheating people at cards. I had no idea about this. My GM completely came up with this months before we got to that point. I had no idea what it was, but I was that weird player that's like, I have somewhere to take it, so I'm not going to leave it. Sure. Why not? I'll keep it. And it was just one of those that it's like, it's a very eclectic item that wouldn't really make any sense. But that's where it's like,
but that's cool,
right.
though.
And it's
because
it makes sense as something that a bandit would have stolen off of some caravan that someone was carrying, trying to sell somewhere, and they stole it. And then the bandit chief goes, this is something that I can cheat people in cards and get more money. And you like, it fit the story really narratively. It was a weird item that if I left it behind, it would have been completely like fine. It wouldn't have hurt anything in the story. And yet now has become this really like funny item that would be like, it's so much fun to use, and also a terrifying like problem if I get caught, my character gets caught with it. So it has all of this great story stuff.
That's a good thing, though, to remember, is that it's okay to throw in just like quirky random stuff. And this is really where like random treasure tables can be useful. Just coming up with things and then thinking about, you know, just maybe deliberately, if there's a hoard of treasure, and of course this is typically in like the fantasy type settings, throw in something a little, maybe not oddball, maybe oddball, but something that is just like, what is that? It doesn't fit neatly into it. And just to make it, I think at worst, your player characters do nothing with it. They don't take the card table home, but it's something. It's something that just like breathes a little bit of life into it. So you've got your general use. You've got your campaign essential stuff, depending on the nature of the campaign. You get your big fat reward at the end, and then maybe a sprinkling of just like oddball stuff, just to see what the players would do with it. Wealth all by itself is going to depend, I think, on its value. That is, like, its value within the game is going to really depend on what kind of adventure, what kind of campaign you're running, and the genre. Like Octoon Cthulhu, like there's no need for money.
Right.
really. Like it's pulp adventure. Um, it- you know, okay. Like there's really just no
Well,
place
and in
for
that
it.
game, you're literally being supported by governments most of the time. So
Right.
money really isn't
Right.
an
And you're like
object.
under orders. You're not going to go shopping.
Right.
Like you have every mission, and this is actually an interesting way to handle equipment. Every mission will have like a support setting, and it's a number, and that gives you an idea of what kinds of equipment would be available to you. And it's like a points based thing to equip your character before going out on an assignment. Um, what other kinds of rewards? You've got levels, okay? You have levels and experience, which you can smush together and just say, call it direct character improvement. You know, we're adding more mechanical things and we're increasing the mechanical things. We're making your character more powerful. Okay, one. You've got wealth, money of some sort. You have equipment. What other ways do you think you can reward your player characters and satisfy your players?
One of the big ones for GMs that I think a lot of people forget about and they should use better are connections slash relationships. So when you are running a campaign or adventure or session or whatever it is, having your players make some sort of connection or relationship with an individual from that adventure, it's going to make it both more memorable for your players because they'll have someone that they're connected to, and it will help you write stories later. Like when you're sitting down and you're going, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, they met the blacksmith Jeff 3 sessions ago. Maybe he gets kidnapped. Or, hey, they rescued this noble, whether that's fantasy noble or sci-fi noble or whatever it is. And now that person has that connection. They're like, oh, well, I really need someone to do job X, and I'm willing to pay significant amounts of money for this. Or whatever, a favor or whatever it is that the players need, you can use that. So I think relationships or connections are a really big thing that people need to remember to use and then remind their players that they have them at certain times.
Yeah. You know, some games formalize this, like Night's Black Agents formalizes this. Uh, Vampire the Masquerade formalizes this. You have certain kinds of relationships, or like some people are sources of information, and some people contacts, allies, whatever you want to call it, are sources of assistance. Like in the World of Darkness games, you can have contacts, you can have allies. And a contact is someone from whom you can get information. An ally is someone who could actually help you bury the bodies, or something like that. And I think you're absolutely right. Is that they're traditionally, and you know, this is the highway that D&D paved. The focus is on character development through powers, through levels, and now like through skill based games. But it's focused on the individual character, or it's powerful items of some sort, and the story dimensions that you can open up um, for yourself and for your players. And also, what I love is when you have a player who has some, and I'll use the word contacts and allies in the World of Darkness sense, because I think it's nice to differentiate. Like, hey, is Bob the guy that you can call and find out like who actually owns that warehouse? Or is Bob again the guy who's gonna, he's gonna show up at 2 o'clock in the morning and help you bury a body? Different Bobs. But I think it's smart to differentiate. Um, when creative players remember that they have those things, they can inject energy into the session by bringing in things that you might not have thought of, or taking part of the story and carrying it. And Traveler does a nice job of that in character creation, because you can have contacts, you can have allies, you can have, people that could potentially be patrons or sources of information or stuff that you develop through character creation. I remember Cyberpunk 2020 in the life path character generation system. You had the mechanical side of character creation, like assigning your skill points and special abilities and all that gobbledygook. But there was an entirely parallel system that really had nothing to do with the mechanics of your character. It was everything about like where's your broken girlfriend, the girlfriend that you broke up with, and her brother hates you and wants to kill you, or something like you would roll this stuff. And so you had this fully fleshed, like kind of weirdo character all these like angsty background elements that were built in. So those kinds of things, some games do that well in providing people with those things from character creation. But baking that into your reward system, I think, is really important. And it like I said, it just opens up so many, not just backward facing, like here's my tortured backstory type stuff, can sometimes be just backwards and individual character facing. Contacts and allies and those kinds of things, patrons, those are all forward facing when it comes to the story. Forward as in like future stories. Yeah, let me ask you this. How do you see, because I think it would be hard taking someone who is, I mean, maybe you're not trying to balance it out, but like a player, for example, let's say who's all they played is 5e. And so they're used to, and all they do is milestones. So they're used to in some regular interval of just being handed a level and then a plus something sword occasionally as time goes by. How do you get them to understand the equal value or comparable value of, okay, I'm not replacing your +1 sword with a +2 sword with a special, flaming or something like that. But you have a connection with the local baron, something like that. How do you wrap that into the story? Get your players rather to see the value in that.
So one of the ways so I am just now getting people to notice that with the Traveler. And by that I mean like having gone from my high end dry session to my Safari World session, my players have now realized, wait a minute, you mean like our backgrounds can just find us jobs? Like, hey, I worked in the corporate sector, so I have connections with corporate sector people that don't have names, and it just says I have a connection here on the side. I'm like, yeah, and then we make a name, and this is the person, and now you have a job. And he's like, oh, so that's really working. One of the ways as a player that I found this is my GMs in the past have been very good at when we get stuck as players, because there's almost always a time that players will get stuck in a situation and go, I don't know what to do. And rather than going, here's the answer, you need to go do this thing, they'll say, well, is there anyone on your character sheet, names that you have written down or in your notes of people you've talked to, that would be able to give you more information on that? And 99.9% of the time, one of the players will be able to look back at their character sheet and go, oh, yeah, we talked to blank. And they would be able to do that. Like they would either be able to do that for us, or they would be able to help us find someone do that, or they'll have the information we need. And that works really well. And remind them on the other side of things, if you tell people that this is something to note, like, and I've done this where it's like, hey, you just made a connection with this person, you should probably write that down. Then like my players have constantly been flipping back and going, is this someone we want to call right now? Is that a connection we want to use? Because like he told me to write that down. Do I really want to cash in that favor on this specific thing? Because I could, but should I? And I think by doing that as a GM, it's a little heavy-handed, but it also is really good at getting players out of that mindset of, well, this is just a name on my sheet. And no, this is like Baron whatever, one favor next to it. Like, okay, do I call in my chip right now and call in that favor that I need to use, or am I going to hold on to that till it's a time that I really need it? But by making that note as a GM to your players, they will remember it, because that's something really important.
Well, that's a really good point. I think too that if you're listening and you're thinking like, how would I get my players to do that? Consider that there is a bit of player education that the GM undertakes. Like you take on the responsibility of educating your players and helping them remember. Like I was, as you were saying, hey, that's not just a name on your character sheet. That's like part of your backstory or something like that. Think of it like a piece of equipment. It's a thing you have in your adventurer's pack or in the trunk of your car that you can go get and you can put to use. And you may need, depending on your players' playing backgrounds, you may need to train them a little bit, remind them a little bit of, how they can go about doing that. But I think it goes back to this idea of player agency. Like I love it when players recognize that it's their job to help build the story too. And they're not just, okay, react to and respond to and work through that which I put your character in. Like they're wanting to push the boundaries and help build where their character is and the circumstances surrounding them. And so pulling something off of, there's Bob. Yeah, Bob is a guy. I'm going to call Bob because he's like this. Or hey, this my contact at like the city records department, like in say a modern game, could he find me this kind of information? And then, maybe you're as GM, you're thinking, probably not. But then you engage in a conversation with the player that might help spur some thought as to, well, where could they get that information? Or, maybe Bob knows someone who owes him a favor. And so Bob's willing to like peddle favors and things like that. But yeah, getting the players to buy into that is it takes some effort. And then over time, you also, I think, in order, if you want to make that work, using NPCs and what the NPCs could enable or provide, those are the rewards. The NPC and what they enable are the reward. That's something that you have to make sure that the players understand. Like, hey, that contact from your past, okay. And you might even, and I think it's useful, especially if you have a group where like you're trying this out for the first time and your players aren't really catching, what you're throwing at them, to stop and say, hey, I just want to make clear, like meta wise. So Baron von Stumplenbelf, or whatever his name is, you just, you intercepted, you got rid of the bandits who were menacing some trade roads that he's in control of, or supposedly. And then you also like went out of your way to, return some stuff to him. His seneschal takes you aside and says, listen, that you really impressed him and blah, blah, blah. Recognize that's a contact that you might be able to turn to. And that it also enables you to open up all kinds of RP opportunities, because it's not like they can, call him at 2:00 in the morning and expect whatever. There's a back and forth.
Right. And that's where, just a PSA for GMs, because I'm learning this myself as a new GM. When you have players ask you that question, that can this person help me? One of the big things to remember is never say just yes or no. And I've found this out the hard way myself very recently. When someone asks, can this person help me? It is always yes and or no but. Because if you just say yes or no, players look at you expectantly and go, what do I do? Yeah.
Tell me the answer.
And it's like, if you say yes, but you say yes and they can do this, then they're going to go, okay, well then that's what I want to do. Like, yes, and this is what they tell you, or yes, and you need to get to this point to contact them, or whatever. But it can't just be yes, they can do it, because then the players are going to go, okay, then they do it, right? You have to carry that next. That's your responsibility as a GM. On the other side of things, if the answer is no, don't just look at your players and say no. I got bit in the butt with this one time in a recent session. So the answer should be no, but you're like, even if it's just no, but that's a really good idea, maybe there's someone else. Well, then they know, okay, well, maybe I need to keep going through my other contacts. Or you say, no, but they might be able to get access to this thing that could help you get that information. Those, like, you'd have to, like, not that players are dumb and they need to be led, but that players need some help. Like, you are collaborative. It's not that, which we've talked about this before, it's not just the story that's in your head that you're trying to get them to write for you, and it's not all their job. You're the person that's supposed to be watching over this. Collaborate with them, and when they ask you that question, okay, now it's your job to pick up the next part of the conversation, and then they will pick up following that. So it is that back and forth, and that's just something that I've run into.
You sprinkle clues and things to guide them a little bit, but yeah, they're whatever your qualifiers that come with yes or no have to be actionable and point subtly, or hopefully subtly, in some direction. Yeah, and no, see, the other thing, if you just say no, well, then they're like, well, he's dead to me, and that's it. Obviously they just shut down any possibility of any kind of activity with that character. So what other form? So back to the topic. Pulling back up here, we have experience that'll add to character power. We have items that will be of specific use and power to the character. We have wealth that could be used to buy stuff like that, you know. Um, and now we have contacts. What other rewards? I have an idea.
What's your idea? Because I also have one, but I want to see what yours is.
Okay, my idea is in-world cachet,
Okay. Yeah.
reputation. And there are some games that formalize this as a system. Star Trek Adventures has like a reputation system, and it's kind of clunky. I don't actually like how it works, so I don't use it. Other games have things like that, but I think that in-game, in-world, in-setting cachet, um, and I'm thinking obviously on the positive side, is very useful because that actually makes, in my experience, that makes the players feel like their characters are, are like growing and succeeding and are like valuable. When it's like the heroes of Walston from High and Dry. There's really no, I mean, unless you wanted to like reduce a difficulty for a role, it's all just story. But you're the big damn heroes now. You have not watched Firefly, which is a crime.
I am halfway through Firefly.
Oh, you are. Have you gotten to the one where like Jane is the big damn hero of the little village,
I think that was the last one we watched.
where there was a statue?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, that kind of thing, like that makes your character that can be really pleasing. In fact, I think that's far more satisfying to the vast majority of players than here's your +2 Vorpal sword. Like it sounds cool, but it's like the toy you get when you're a kid is the biggest thing on Christmas morning, and 3 months later you're like, it's all right. It's just another thing. Having something that feeds back and comes back into the story because you've got credit and cachet, like your character is cool here, your character gets behind the velvet rope at this place or has the Duke's ear or something like that. You can promote the characters in a way into like higher levels of society and of the story, bigger picture, through those kinds of rewards, and they're totally story based.
It's also a really good way to introduce a tone when you do that. So when you have your characters walk into a room and everyone starts to talk about them, it makes it really easy for you to say, yeah, you walk into the room and everyone knows who you are. And that can either be a really good thing or a really bad thing and you can use that like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're famous. You're not going to be able to sneak around here. Like people are going to see you like,
Right.
sorry, you're not in a disguise and you're movie star famous in this town. Guess what? Every time someone sees you, they're going to be
Yep.
coming up to you and asking for your autograph.
And it could be good initially, but if you
Right.
misbehave, it turns into a bad thing. Yeah, totally.
Or vice versa, you're really famous because you beat up the local hero in a fight that
Yeah.
you thought was a bandit and it's not. Now you're here and everyone hates you.
No, I
And
wouldn't consider that a reward though.
it but it can be because you might be famous somewhere else and it's good, but naturally there are consequences, and that's something that like, and I've had a GM do that to me. It's like, oh, that really stinks, until you get to the noble who was like, oh no, I hated that guy, like he was stealing all my money, and now it's a benefit to you because it's like, well, I guess I have connections with the guy that can give me jobs, and that's where it depends. But it gives you as a GM flexibility, but it also gives your players that recognition of, okay, you can be famous and or infamous, and for
Depending
different people those,
yeah.
yeah, that can be beneficial or not, or even with different people it's conflicted. So yeah, I think that is a really great system of reward if you can figure out how you want to do that with your game, whether it's built into the system or you come up with it on your own.
What else? Is there anything you've got
Yes,
something else here?
I think knowledge and information in world is another big thing, and that's not like we already talked about connections and them being able to give you knowledge and information, but giving your players, like, they go through this particularly difficult dungeon, but they find some information like, hey, like you never would have known this, but there's this other like person over here that you want to go and like attack their dungeon, or hey, there are these pirates over here that you can go. I'm thinking like Traveler here, like there are these pirates that have gone and they ransacked this ship, and now you have that information. You could go do something about that, whether that's I'm going to go attack the pirates and take the stuff they took, or I'm going to take that to the local authorities to boost my reputation. Knowledge and information in world can also be really helpful because it might make something easier down the line that's not even a role. It just allows your players to plan for something, or it allows them to actually have a benefit to a role or whatever else that they can use that for. But I do think that that's something in game that can be really useful as, hey, you know this and no one else does.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that's like derp. That's so obvious, but it could be easily overlooked. And the lovely thing about that is, so like NPCs as reward. What the NPCs can provide also provide you an avenue as the GM to lead to the next story or breathe some other elements into the plot or whatever. This is the same way. You know, in Travelers Pirates of Drinax, um, campaign, which is a gigantic sandbox. There are a number of places where the writers, I think, did a really nice job of explaining, like, well, you know, where are the characters going to learn about how to be pirates? Like, where do the players think through? Okay, how do we be privateers intelligently and not get caught? Or if we're privateers, but we don't want our patron to be implicated. We're acting as pirates, but we don't want and that's part of the campaign. There are NPC encounters that make sense where like the GM can feed them information through the NPC, but you feed them information in order to make the campaign go so that then they can operate in a way that works within that the structure of that overall campaign. But yeah, knowledge again, like you want you. It's such a fine line because, I think that like I think D&D, unfortunately, for the most part, like they err on one side, they go too far, and like you want your players to feel like their characters are consequential, are have ability, you know, and like, you know, tough through or make it through things. You want them to feel powerful. Now, it's really easy to just like shower characters with extra abilities, items, blah, 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 make things, and then it becomes, I think, too easy and kind of silly and pointless. But it is definitely a real thing when the player feels like, oh, my character learned this thing. They like, you know, in like a vampire game, you find out like the dirty secret that the city's prince is trying to keep hidden, and you're like, well, what am I going to do with that? And that's all forward looking in the story. It all points to more story. That's a great one. So what do we got so far?
So we have experience and levels.
Yep.
We have money of some form,
wealth of some sort,
items
broken down into three sorts, maybe four actually.
Yeah. Knowledge, and then relationships or characters, like NPCs basically.
Yeah.
And then what was the one? Cachet, that's right. So we have
like
6.
reputation,
yeah,
things like that. And items, remember, we differentiated into general use, which are probably going to be forgotten but useful, obviously. Maybe campaign specific, depending on the needs of the story. Big fat reward that they would work toward at the end of the campaign. And then we added in the other one, which was
just random little fun trinkets.
Trinkets and oddities to make them go like, huh. I remember I used to have this book, like the mother of all treasure table. It was ridiculous, actually. Like I got it for cheap. I ended up selling, I think, because it was like anyway. It was ridiculous because it was so packed. Like, who sat and thought up all these things? I have no idea. A white fur mantle. Yeah, it's worth like XYZ gold if you can find someone to buy it. But then you wonder, like, that one player who's like, I want to look like a pimp, so I'm gonna wear this white fur mantle. No, yeah, sprinkling some things in there so that your hoards or your piles of loot don't become just, okay, it's a pile of loot and you stop there.
It's also a really good way to just differentiate like important NPCs that, like, hey, you just took down like the underboss of this like criminal organization and he has this really weirdly specific trinket, but if you have it, well, everyone knows that you beat that guy. So it's like it can like there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with just random trinkets that you can give out.
Yeah.
And players love to collect that kind of stuff. And I can say that because I've been that player. So it can be a lot of fun.
You've been that player, yeah. Oh, me too. Me too. We had in the last 5e campaign that I played in a couple years ago. There was this weird. It was like a cart, you know, like a like a wagon, and it was like a it was, I don't know. It was hard to describe. I guess it was like a supply wagon, and so it had like, you know, shelves, and it had like, you know, water storage barrels, and it was meant to. It was almost like a first century, like, you know, chow wagon from like, you know, whatever. But it was magic, and it would just like create food and water. And we ran across it in this caravan, and then ended up like everyone was dead or something. And I'm like, I'm keeping it. They're like, where are you going to take it? I'm like, I don't care. We'll just take it with us. We're traveling overland. We need horses. We're just going to take the wagon with us, and then like we could like just make food and sell it or something like that. Like I remember just I insisted because it was just such a weird magic item. I was like, crap, we never have to worry about food or water because we got this weird cart we're just going to drag around with us. But yeah, I think that's a good breakdown of different kinds of rewards. And to be honest, I recognize, like, in deference to the way the river flows, experience however you dole it out, whether you're using a level-based or you're playing a skill-based system or something like that. Most players expect something like that over time. But I really think you get more mileage and fun out of the other forms, because then it's not just like one means of reward and one means of giving some sense of progress in the story.
I agree completely. And that's one of the things that makes RPGs so much fun, is that there are so many different ways to get a reward, that it's not just, okay, the same thing every week. It can, some of the most fun stories are the ones where you find the random wagon that gives you food and water, and then you talk about that for months on end because, oh my gosh, I can't believe I found that. Like those are the things that really make the games, any game, truly memorable, is when you have that kind of stuff. So always remember that there's more reward than just advancing your character, and that's to GMs or players.
Agreed. All right. Well, you're listening and you have some ideas, other ways to reward your players through their gameplay, or different ways you might thin slice some of those. Maybe call them like broad categories of equipment, or items or things like that, or a different take on wealth. Let us know. Share the wealth of ideas and help everyone run and play their games just a little bit better.
That's right.
Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.